What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Matt George from Locked On Kings as the Sacramento Kings select Keegan Murray, fourth overall in this year's NBA draft. A bit of a divisive pick by the Sacramento Kings. Was Keegan Murray the right selection for the Kings, for that organization at pick number 4? Should they have potentially traded down a little bit further in the draft? And how will Keegan Murray fit with the likes of De'Aaron Foxe and Domantas Sabonis? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. Find the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and, of course, all scores that you could ever imagine across all major leagues. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, UFC, golf, you name it, they've got it over at BetOnline. So head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is Matt George from Locked On Kings. You can follow on Twitter at MattGeorgeSAC. Now, Matt, the Kings selecting Keegan Murray, fourth overall in this year's NBA draft. A little bit of divisiveness about this pick, possibly. Let's start first and foremost. What to you makes Murray the right guy for Sacramento at number 4?
Well, he checks all the boxes for what the Sacramento Kings need. The Kings need floor spacing next to De'Aaron Foxe and Domantas Sabonis. Check. The Kings need someone with a high basketball IQ who can come in and make an immediate impact of helping this team accomplish their goal of making the playoffs right away. Check. And the Kings need help defensively. Now, I don't think Keegan Murray is going to be considered the best defensive player in the draft by any means, but he's someone who knows how to hold his own on the defensive end of the floor. The Kings are a dreadful defensive team, and on one hand, they could try and improve by getting a bunch of really good individual defenders on this team. But in reality, when your two best players are also not known for their defense, well, you have to try and find a way to bring in players who can complement them, and you can ultimately build a solid team defensive system. And Keegan Murray helps with that. So you could have the fit argument. Keegan Murray makes sense. You could have the best player available argument. Keegan Murray makes sense. A lot of people get hung up on the highest ceiling argument, but that's something I personally can live with.
Okay, and I think one of the reasons that this pick was maybe a bit of a head scratcher for some people is because there was a lot of speculation that, if Keegan Murray was the guy for Sacramento, why not, trade back, right? Trade down, recoup an additional asset or something, and select him, a little bit lower down, right? 5th, 6th, or 7th, possibly. To your best knowledge, is that something that Sacramento attempted to try and do, was trying to trade back down a little bit, and it just didn't ultimately pan out that way? Or just kind of what was their philosophy going into draft night with that 4th overall pick?
Well, the Kings, as far as I understand, they explored all of their options to see if such a path was available to them. One thing that I disagree with that you said, and I know you're being generic, not necessarily sharing your opinion, Keegan Murray wasn't going to be there past 5. Like, people need to get this idea out of their head that Keegan Murray was going to be available at 6 or 7. If Sacramento did not take Keegan Murray at 4, if they had taken Jaden Ivey, the Pistons were going to take Keegan Murray. There were 2 teams that were interested in trading up to 4 that weren't named the Detroit Pistons. That's the Indiana Pacers and the San Antonio Spurs. Both of them wanted to move up to 4 because they wanted to draft Keegan Murray, and they had a feeling that he wasn't going to get there past 4, wasn't going to fall to them. So I get a little frustrated with, and I've talked about this a lot with Sacramento Kings fans here in Sacramento, like, this is real life. It's not NBA 2K. You have to have 2 to tango in order to work out a trade. You can't just say, well, this trade makes sense for us, so we're going to force them to accept it. The right deal has to be out there for both sides. And the reality was there wasn't the right deal where the Sacramento Kings could move back and still land their guy in Keegan Murray. And clearly there wasn't a deal good enough for them to not take Keegan Murray altogether. There wasn't enough value out there for the Kings to say this deal is more worth it to us than not drafting Keegan Murray, who they feel almost unanimously, or according to general manager Monty McNair, the front office felt unanimously that Keegan Murray is a better player and has a better future than Jaden Ivey does.
Yeah, and you mentioned that earlier, kind of talking about the ceiling criticisms of Keegan Murray, right? What would be your pushback to the argument that Keegan Murray doesn't have as high of a ceiling as Jaden Ivey, and that's the direction that the Kings should have gone if you're trying to find the BPA best player available type pick?
Well, the best player available type pick is Keegan Murray. Like the best player available right now is Keegan Murray. The numbers support that. How he's going to be able to come in and make an immediate impact because of his age supports that. Now, I'm not saying the gap is massive, just like I don't think the gap is massive between Jaden Ivey's higher ceiling than Keegan Murray. The reality is people fall in love with the flash. They fall in love with the flair, the athleticism that Jaden Ivey possesses. It impressed me too. We've seen those highlight dunks. We've seen those highlight reels. We see the comparisons to John Morant or to Donovan Mitchell, right? I get why. And this is also a guards league, and Jaden Ivey is considered the best guard in this draft class, and I think rightfully so. But Keegan Murray is very sound fundamentally. He's a good all-around basketball player. I understand people say, what does Keegan Murray do? There's not one thing that Keegan Murray does that is phenomenal, superstar level. I actually agree with that. But the Kings need a well-rounded basketball player who can help them in multiple different facets. And the reality is, De'Aaron Foxe is still on this roster. The Kings are looking at De'Aaron Foxe to take them as far as they're going to go. Jaden Ivey, in so many ways, is a copy of De'Aaron Foxe. The Kings just dealt with an experiment that failed with De'Aaron Foxe and Tyrese Halliburton trying to work together. In all ways, or in all arguments, Keegan Murray was the right pick for Sacramento, at least in my opinion.
So how does Keegan Murray then, when we look at this current Sacramento Kings roster, how does Keegan Murray factor into the rest of the front court of this Kings roster with Sabonis, with Barnes, with Rashawn Holmes? Like where is his spot in this roster going to be, to your best guess, opening night?
Well, for one thing, Jackson, this roster better not look on opening night like it does right now. And I think Monte McNair and the Kings are aware of that. That's where also a lot of frustration from Sacramento Kings fans and Sacramento media came with the draft night, is the Kings left draft night with Keegan Murray, but that's it. I mean, they traded their 47th pick, I think it was the 47th pick, for the rights to Sasha Vuvacek, I think is how you pronounce his name. He's a European player who's 26 years old. There's no inclination at all if he's going to come and join the Kings or not. Theoretically, he is a player and plays a position that the Sacramento Kings could use, but I mean, I don't understand why the Cavaliers would just give his rights away for a second-round pick if they felt ultimately confident that one of the top European players is just going to come over to the NBA. So I have no idea how that's going to work out. But in reality, it was a pretty quiet draft night for Sacramento, especially considering all the rumors, all the fireworks. Hey, the Kings could trade. There's so many teams that are interested in Jaden Ivey. To ultimately just pick the guy you want and let the rest of the draft play out the way that it did, it's kind of quiet. And that frustrated some people because they know that the Kings need to improve their roster. But to answer your question, Keegan Murray is a night one starter on this Kings team. Unless somehow they go out and find the perfect starting four next to Domantas Sabonis, which I don't think is out there realistically. And even if they did, they'd probably have to trade Harrison Barnes to get it. And then you're probably starting Keegan Murray at the 3, which I don't think is his natural NBA position. I think Keegan Murray on opening night is going to start right next to Domantas Sabonis. On offensively, he doesn't have to do too much. He can space the floor, take advantage of catch and shoot opportunities. If there's ever smaller guys that are switched onto him, we see his ability to score in the post. And then defensively, the Kings as a whole need an overhaul defensively, but I expect whatever they're going to try and do under new head coach Mike Brown, that Keegan Murray and everybody will be able to fill their roles in that new defensive system.
I'm glad you brought up Mike Brown there, because that's what I wanted to follow up with. Is just, I'm curious, how much influence do you think Mike Brown even had over this selection? I know it's kind of interesting. You're bringing in a brand new head coach. He's currently coaching on the bench in the finals. Like, how does that factor into the entire pre-draft process, do you think, for the Kings?
Well, first and foremost, from what I understand, is Keegan Murray is a guy that Sacramento wanted pretty much the entire process. And then when they moved up to 4, they realized, okay, there's little to no chance that we're not going to have the opportunity to take him. At 7, I think they were as concerned as I was that Keegan Murray wasn't going to be there at 7, and rightfully so. I actually asked this question to Kings general manager Monte McNair at Keegan's press conference yesterday. I asked him, I said, we haven't been able to talk to Coach Mike Brown yet. How does he feel about the pick? How does he feel about Keegan Murray's versatility? You can play him in so many different positions and use him in so many different ways. And the first thing McNair brought up was the fact that Mike was kind of kept in the loop during the playoff and during the NBA Finals process. Mike was very committed to the Golden State Warriors and naturally naturally so, easy for me to say. He was trying to make sure that he got another ring and finished his business there in Golden State. But while that was happening, he did share with us at one point in his press conference that during a day off after a travel day, he came over to Sacramento and had some meetings with some players and meetings with the Kings. And during those meetings, Sacramento told him about Keegan Murray, expressed their interest in Keegan Murray, showed him highlights and things like that, scouting reports, workouts, and kind of slowly brought him on board. So it didn't sound like Keegan Murray was necessarily Mike Brown's pick all the way. I don't know if there was a Mike Brown pick all the way. I don't think he was interested in the draft. He was focusing on the playoffs at that point. But the Kings definitely won Mike Brown over and had his seal of approval in drafting Murray.
How does Keegan Murray's future look in Sacramento? How does he help benefit guys like De'Aaron Foxe and Domantas Sabonis? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Kings. Matt, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Always a pleasure, Jackson. Good to see you.